Hey everybody, it is Daniel here with Mobile Syrup, and you are looking at the upcoming Rogers exclusive. This is the LG G Flex. So, what makes this phone special? Well, aside from the massive 6-inch display, this is the first device released in Canada that is actually flexible. Now, obviously, you're looking at a device that isn't going to curl up into a ball, but the chassis and the screen are made of a plastic substrate known as plastic OLED. So what you're seeing here is a body that, while not exactly flexible, is manipulable in a few ways. Another few interesting features about this device, aside from the fact that it's massive, is that it has the volume buttons and power button on the back, much like the LG G2 that was released last year. This is a little bit of a different device, though, than that one. Other than the lower resolution, this comes with a 720p display. There are a few tweaks made to the software that will appeal to those who like to use the phone with one hand. This is also being marketed as a competitor to the Galaxy Note rather than the Galaxy S. So we're looking at features like multi-window here, which is taken directly from the Galaxy Note 3 and its predecessors. And there are a few other tweaks to the software that will appeal to those who like phablets and big phones. Now, obviously here, the main draw is this screen. It is curved, and while that doesn't give you much increased usability at the get-go, what it does allow is for a more immersive experience when you're looking at movies and watching other content in widescreen. It sort of wraps around and gives you a more cinematic impression. That doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to notice a big difference between this and, say, the Galaxy Note 3, but it is a great example of what future technologies could enable us to do given the right tools. This is more an experiment from LG than any other device, and what it seems like is that a bunch of disparate parts of the company came together to showcase their latest and greatest technologies, and LG proper decided to create a smartphone from it. What that means is that this has a lot of things going for it, but it's not going to necessarily knock any other competitors out of the park, and it certainly isn't going to be for everybody. This is going to be a niche device. It is very, very big. For example, on the bottom right here, you can see there are on-screen buttons, but LG decided to maintain a virtual menu button rather than the more traditional Google multi-window multitasking button, which is now accessed by holding down the home button like it used to be with capacitive buttons. But there's a little bit of flexibility here in the sense that you can actually make it easier to hit with your thumb by moving all of them to the right or to the left. And for those who don't quite have the reach of getting the top of the screen for the notification shade with your left or right thumb, there is a shortcut here. So that's actually really useful if you want to quickly access your notifications without having to adjust the phone in your hand. Now, anybody who's used the G2 is going to feel right at home here. This is a sense, not a sense, this makes no sense. This is a custom LG skin. This is running Android 4.2.2, so quite disappointing in that sense because it's a very old version comparatively. Even the LG G2 was updated to Android 4.2, so there are a few improvements over the stock Android 4.2 version that came on the G2, and that's just because the build is newer and LG's had time to fix a few of the lingering software issues and usability bugs, but ultimately this is still very much an older version. So you'll see here Android 4.2.2, JDQ39B, so it's quite an old version. Hopefully that'll get updated to KitKat in the coming months. One thing to point out, though, is that this is quite a bit different than the software from the G. 2, and that includes things like dual window, which I showed you, split view, where you can actually tap on a link on the full screen to run dual windows automatically. So that's an interesting feature. And slide aside, which was present on the G2 at launch. It's where you slide your finger when you use 3 fingers to slide it, your fingers across the screen, and it puts the app into more of a sort of a proprietary multitasking mode. So not quite working here. Oh, there we go. Okay, so we've saved that app, and now we can drag down and restore it like that. The other thing that I wanted to point out is that this sort of has its own proprietary immersive mode. Now you can see here we're using Chrome, but there are no virtual buttons on the bottom. That's because LG's actually implemented its own sort of immersive mode feature, where you can hide the UI if you don't need it, and that's on a per app basis. So that's quite interesting, and let's go into the settings to check it out. Now, what you can see here is that they've really made an effort to improve the way that that you can use this device with one hand. So obviously you can change the keypad, the keyboard, and the lock screen, as well as swipe the front buttons left to right. So you can swipe them left to right and actually change the size of them to make it more easy to access. That's quite cool. And we're also looking at gestures here. So we have knock on, which was included in the LG G2. There's also the ability to bring the phone to your face to answer an incoming call, or silence an incoming call by putting the phone on its face. You can flip the phone to snooze an alarm, and move windows, move home screen items by tilting the phone left and right. So these are all features that are taken pretty much straight from Samsung, but this is quite effective actually at implementing them. So let's look at the feature that I mentioned earlier, and that would be the front touch buttons. Now what you can do is you can hide the front touch buttons on a per app basis. So as I said here, I've enabled Chrome Beta, and you can go in and you can enable it on your favorite news reading apps or anything that you need full screen on. I use it for games because that's really neat, where I can make sure that my favorite games like Threes are full screen, and they adjust quite well. I'm actually quite impressed with that. So a few issues with the software have been negated by LG's proprietary implementation, but it'll be interesting to see what the company does when it updates the G Flex to KitKat and it's stuck with having disparate implementations of that immersive mode like feature. So we'll see what happens then. But right now, I'm actually quite impressed with the 4.2.2 features. You can see here there's transparency when you load a few of the apps, and there's actually nice effects on the home screen, so we're not looking at something that's as ugly. The theme is a little bit nicer. It's not quite as ugly as the G2, but it's nowhere near the quality of the latest skins from HTC and Samsung in their newest devices. So that's one thing to consider. You're not really going to get the latest and greatest software when you buy this phone, and you're also going to be waiting quite a long time for the updates to come. If you can live with that, you're going to find a device that is extremely quick. This is running a Snapdragon 800 processor at 2.26 gigahertz. It's got 2 gigs of RAM. There's 32 gigs of internal storage here. It's running on Rogers 2100 and 2600 megahertz LTE networks, and it's got a fantastic camera. This is running the same 13 megapixel camera as the G2, but it's also been boosted a little bit with a few new features. Obviously, those features came to the G2 in the KitKat update, so anybody who has the G2 will know exactly what I'm talking about here. But there are some really neat modes here, including the ability to remove people from the background of your photos. There's a great HDR mode and a good panorama mode. There's burst shot. This can take up to 100 photos in a few seconds. You can use dual camera to take a photo with the front and back cameras at the same time. There's a really great low light mode in night mode. There's a time catch shot, which puts a few photos together and makes it look like you're capturing multiple images at the same time. And of course, intelligent auto, which I wish was on by default, but it automatically identifies the characteristics of the scene and takes a photo. So this is sort of like superior auto in the Xperia Z and Z1 series, but unfortunately it doesn't look like you can use this as the default method. It always goes back to auto mode. That being said, LG has done some really interesting things here. They're also experimenting with a back that's quote-unquote self-healing. Now this uses a sort of polymer that will make scratches, small scratches, disappear over time, but as you can see, it's very glossy and very prone to fingerprints. So that's the trade-off you make. It's also quite slippery, and while it's not quite as bad as the LG G2, it doesn't look as good because the LG G2 has a more matte finish, whereas this gray color shows off those fingerprints very easily. So you got to take that into account when you're buying this. Obviously, with the 6-inch phone here, you're also going to be looking at usability problems. The curvature of the phone makes it a little bit smaller, but it's still a large device. It's a very, very big phone. You're going to want it to make sure that you are comfortable with the phone in your pocket of this size, and make sure that all your usability changes, like those one-handed options, are enabled if you want to make the best use of this size. However, let's talk about the resolution, because a lot of people have been complaining that this only has a 720p display. Now, this is a great OLED display. It rivals anything that Samsung's created. Even though it's 720p, this is much better than, say, the 720p display on the Galaxy Note 2. The colors are accurate, the viewing angles are fantastic, and this is not running anything but the latest technology. So you're not looking at 2 subpixels for every pixel. This is 3 RGB subpixels for every pixel. The colors are accurate, blacks are extremely deep, and whites are phenomenal. So LG's, even though they are looking at this as a version 1, generation 1 device, you're not going to suffer at all from that. I really like this screen. It's phenomenal. It just does everything that I needed to do despite the lower pixel density. So I would recommend this screen. I don't want you to think that just because it has a lower resolution screen, you should not buy it. Definitely take a look at it. It has a sort of paper-like graininess to it that I really enjoy. It's not going to be for everybody. It's an OLED screen. It's not quite as bright and as oversaturated as a Samsung Super AMOLED screen, but it's far more accurate. I would compare this more to the Moto X screen than any Galaxy Super AMOLED screen that you've used on one of their devices. So again, this is the LG G Flex. It's coming to Canada exclusively on the Rogers LTE network for $199 on a 2-year term, and it is coming in early April. This has been Daniel Bader from Mobile Syrup. Thank you so much for watching.